Welcome, everybody. You're listening to AFSO 21's Weekend Wrap-Up Podcast. Here is your host, Kevin Ferrara.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Weekend Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Kevin Ferrara, and first and foremost, as always, thank you to our audience members, those that are out there in YouTube land, podcast land. Please, as always, like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. And if we're not doing what we should be doing, give us a thumbs down. You know, we like that feedback. So, again, we're so glad that you're joining us today. And this episode is going to be one that is very informative. The reason being is, as I've been talking about here for the past several podcasts, PFAS blood testing is starting to pick up. Even though the DoD is doing it for active duty military and DoD civilians, not so much for the former firefighters, veterans. There is a workaround, and that being Eurofins has now jumped into the PFAS blood testing market. So today's podcast is going to be, we're going to have guests on this podcast. We're going to have Andrew Patterson and Taryn McKnight from Eurofins and EmpowerDX. They've sort of merged, and they're the ones offering the PFAS blood testing out there on the market. So before we get started with them, as always, let's hear from one of our sponsors. And today we're going to listen to, excuse me, I had to clear my throat there. We're going to go ahead and listen to First in Wellness. As you know, we've partnered with First in Wellness. They have a very informative, very easy to use program out there for firefighters. I highly encourage you to go ahead and check them out. We've also got some discount codes, so take a listen to their sponsor promo. And when we return, we're going to be listening to Andrew Patterson and Taryn McKnight from Eurofins and EmpowerDX. Stay tuned. Being an emergency responder involves risks, but you have the power to mitigate such risk. Kevin Ferrara here from AFSO 21's Weekend Wrap-Up Podcast, and I want to introduce you to First in Wellness. Their mission is to provide affordable and easy-to-follow programs that don't require a complete lifestyle change to experience more energy, restorative sleep, and confidence in your body. Offering individual and group programs that produce guaranteed results without sacrificing your long-term health and well-being, First in Wellness is so confident in their programs, if you're not satisfied in the first 60 days, they'll completely refund your money. For a limited time only, use promo code AFSOFIT15 to get 15% off their First in Fitness program, or use AFSORES50 to get 50% off their First in Resilience program. First in Wellness also offers grants specifically for group resilience program. To learn more about First in Wellness, head over to firstinwellness.com. That's firstinwellness.com. All right, folks, welcome back. And as you heard from the top of the podcast, our guest today, we actually have two. We have Andrew Patterson and Taryn McKnight. They are representing Eurofins, and as you see in the background of Taryn's, we've got EmpowerDX, and they are going to be our subject matter experts on what really is becoming the popular PFAS blood testing amongst the firefighters, you know, my audience members. This thing has taken off. We've said in previous podcasts that the DoD is doing PFAS blood testing through their own labs, but for retirees and veterans, we don't get that same opportunity. So fortunately, Eurofins and EmpowerDX hit the market, and I have to admit, it's hair on fire with veterans and former firefighters going to their website and getting these blood tests and then sharing that information with me. And like I said, we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to let them talk about that. You guys have heard enough from me in the past several podcasts. So with that, folks, welcome to the podcast, and please introduce yourselves to the audience.
Thank you, Kevin. I guess I'll go first. Hi, my name is Andrew Patterson. I'm the technical director for Eurofins Environment Testing here in the U.S. My home base is in Sacramento, where we developed and currently do the testing for the PFAS exposure blood test. But I do travel around to a lot of our labs and try to help out folks where they need. I have a background both in legacy contaminants such as PCBs and dioxins, but really a lot of focus on the other half of my brain has all been PFAS. I started doing PFAS testing backwards of most folks. I actually developed a method for blood back in 2008, and then worked backwards from there to tissue and food and feed and finally water. So I've been doing this a little while, and I'm more than pleased to see this idea come to fruition on this remote test.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taryn McKnight. I am a PFAS practice leader for Eurofins. So I've been in the environmental testing business for about 20 years, specializing in emerging contaminants of concern. So those being chemicals that are not yet regulated, or at least not broadly regulated yet, like PFAS.
All right. Well, again, welcome. I think this is going to be a very informative podcast. Like I said, audience members have really been reaching out to me, over the past, I'd say months, maybe almost a year. The DoD started their testing back in October of 2020, and ever since then, firefighters, current firefighters, the military and DoD civilians, they've been questioning, what do these numbers mean? What do these levels mean? So hopefully, from the Eurofins and EmpowerDX side, you can speak to how those, what those numbers mean, what individuals should be looking at in terms of, their reports. Because I have to be honest, what the DoD is giving, it's cut and dry. But at the end of the day, the doctors, they're handing these firefighters their test results and saying, hey, we don't know what the numbers mean. Good luck to you. And that's really not, what these individuals should be hearing or receiving from their doctor. So, they reach out to me, they reach out to others. Hopefully they're reaching out to you guys, because I think you guys have some tech support as well, that says, hey, if you're curious what these numbers mean, reach out to us and we can, we can do what we can. So let's start into this. We heard a little bit, how each of you, got into this, a little bit of your background, but how did, I guess, how and why did Eurofins really want to get into the PFAS blood testing? They have all these other tests available. How did PFAS come to light? And I guess can you explain from start to where we are today, how that transition came to be?
Maybe I'll start with just a little background on who Eurofins is. That might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Absolutely.
So we're a global network of laboratories. We do everything from pharmaceutical and biotech, clinical, to environmental, and we got involved in testing for PFAS in the environment back in around 2000. So some of your listeners might be familiar with the Hollywood film Dark Waters, that's based on a documentary about PFAS contamination. So it was that landmark case that we got involved in doing PFAS testing with. And since then, we've just been heavily investing in method development, developing better analytical techniques, being able to test for PFAS in a wider range of matrices, and eventually that led us to doing blood. And then just for clarity's sake, the involvement with EmpowerDX is, EmpowerDX is also a Eurofins company. They are a direct-to-consumer company. And so we were fortunate enough to have this sister company as a platform to be able to bring this test to private citizens. Because typically, as an analytical laboratory, we work with the government, consultants, and agencies like that. We don't really get involved with private citizens. So this allowed us to make it accessible to retired firefighters and folks you were mentioning at the beginning. But I'll let Andrew tell you kind of about the synthesis of developing the test.
No, Taryn, you did a great job. I mean, for us, we have two major PFAS hubs, centers of excellence, if you will. And between those, we do perform about 10,000 PFAS tests a month. And this is on anything you can think of. This is on air, water, soil, consumer products, food, feed. And so we've really, through the years and through the thousands and thousands of tests, we've really honed in on the best approach to deliver the highest quality data. And that's one thing I love being with Eurofins, because the focus is on the data and on the customer first. There's some major decisions being made on these projects that we have, no matter what the analysis, but especially with PFAS these days. And so high data quality comes first before anything else. We'll spend a lot of extra money to deliver that data. We'll talk about the isotopes that we use in this test to ensure that we're getting the right concentrations. But for us, blood was a natural choice. And blood is PFAS in blood. When people say PFAS in blood, traditionally that's been done by serum. And so that'll be a venous blood draw. You'll allow the blood to clot. You'll centrifuge it down. You'll take off the serum fraction and then ship that on dry ice somewhere. And just, you can tell from me just talking about it, that's a specialized approach. It requires some sort of phlebotomy, or I guess EMT, to pull off that to generate the serum to get that test. So it's a lot more involved, and it's more time consuming. And then we actually, turns out, have a lot of pediatric clients. And so drawing blood on a child is just that much worse. And so really the genesis came about because of COVID and because of this need to reduce the volume. And so between those two things, really, I mean, we had projects lined up. We had blood projects for impacted communities and for first responders, and we couldn't get access during COVID. And so instead of just sitting around, we said, okay, this is the time. We need to make this happen. And so through about a year and a half of method development, we came up with the remote blood test, which then opened up a lot of doors. This is self-administered, so you don't need to go to a phlebotomist. We could deploy these kits right to your mailbox. I mean, one of the things that we were sort of inspired by were the DNA genetic testing, where this kit shows up at your house, you do a little something, and then you zip it off somewhere, and then you get your results. And that's what we wanted. I mean, we wanted to be able to get results for PFAS on your phone. And trust us, when we first started this, people thought we were nuts. They said, well, how can you do this in whole blood? And how can you do this in whole blood at a smaller volume? And those were things that we had to cross along the way. And I think I'm rambling now. I don't know if I'm getting a nod from Taryn, but I'm just really, I'm pretty excited about kind of how this all came to be, because I saw it go from a Post-it note and an idea to now we have website support on EmpowerDX, which is the amazing part to me. The science part I can wrap my head around, but some of the IT stuff to make this all mesh is pretty amazing. Taryn, you want to take a little bit, or Kevin? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, it's I took the test. I reached out to you guys through some other channels and everything, and when this thing first started, I think before it even hit the public market, took the test, and I was impressed at the ease of doing it. Especially from being a veteran that deals with the VA. The audience members out there, they know. You try to schedule a VA appointment just to go in and get labs. I'm going through a battery of different labs, my initial labs and follow-ups. And you can't get an appointment for anywhere between 2 and 6 months out, just to draw blood, so in preparation of your follow-up with your doctor. So having the ability to purchase this online, publicly now, and, folks, it does. It took me less than 5 minutes knock this thing out, package it back up, and put it back in the mail. And that's what really sold me, is that, it's just the logistics of this, the ease of use, and like you said, you don't have to go in and see a doctor. You just do it at home anytime you want. You could have your family members help you if you need to, and pop it back into mail, and a short time later, you get an email with your lab results, and that's and I've heard the same feedback from the former firefighters, the veterans out there that are taking this test as well. They're like, holy cow, this thing is so simple. I don't have to go schedule and waste my time, drive in and sit there in the waiting room and just to get the blood drawn, and then you sit there and wait and wait and wait. So yeah, they're excited over this, and I'm excited that you guys broke the barrier, really. And I mean,
and even more of a barrier. I mean, you bring up a good point, but we actually had people approach us and say, I want to get my blood tested for PFAS, but my doctor won't authorize a blood draw.
Yep.
Because this test is, it's a little bit of an orphan. It doesn't, if there's no set of conditions that would have a doctor say, you know what, we should test your blood for PFAS. And then even if they got these data, not all doctors know what to do with it. And so we actually ran into roadblocks where people couldn't get to their own blood, which is kind of a wild concept, that one of the most difficult things to get to you is just inside you. So that was another thing that we checked the box of overcoming here, was just that, why don't you have access to your own blood?
Yeah.
And I think on that topic, it's important to understand that this is a environmental exposure test as opposed to a clinical test that folks are more accustomed to when they're getting their blood drawn. So a clinical test is going to have, expected ranges with the results, right? If you're getting a vitamin D test, it'll tell you this is the normal range. You're either, below or above that normal range. PFAS is an environmental exposure test for something that doesn't belong in your body. There is no normal range. The normal range would be 0. These are
thank you
right. These are man-made chemicals.
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. That's been an argument. We've been foot stomping for so long, especially with Congress. Is that I mean, what more can I say, Taryn? I mean, you just nailed it out of the park. It's man-made chemicals. It should be 0, but yet, I don't want to throw the CDC under the bus, but they did their NHANES study. They come up with these 95th percentiles and then these geometric means, and I've been using sort of the geometric mean as the average, and it's it's the average of those that they analyzed, and just to show that, hey, our firefighters, military firefighters, have elevated levels. About 95%, 96% of those that did this survey I'm doing, because the DoD's not doing it. So I started this survey, and about 95, 96% have elevated levels of PFHXS, about 50%, 51% for PFAS, which is scary. It's, and again, it's, Andrew, like you said, it's, the blood's there. We just need somebody to draw it and analyze it. And, it didn't dawn on me until you said that. It's very difficult, to get that done. And, so again, I can't, I don't want to cut you guys off, but
no, not
it's
at
just,
all.
it's so exciting. And to know that there's, a company out there that has what I'll call a solution to overcoming that challenge, that first barrier. The first step is to get the blood analyzed, and then we move on, after that. And yeah, it's so difficult just to get to that first step. So thanks.
Well, we really appreciate your feedback too, Kevin, because we thought we had come up with something that was not just innovative, but needed. And it was, having conversations with folks like yourself that could really give us sort of validation that what you're experiencing, what your community and colleagues are experiencing, and that there there was a desire and a need for it. So we appreciate your feedback on this.
And
Oh,
unfortunately, the fire community does have elevated levels, or can have elevated levels, not all the time, but
right.
when we brought this test up, I mean, there was a while when I was doing webinars and I had Band-Aids on every one of my fingers because I had tested my blood so many different times, and in fact, we had about 30 or 40 people at the lab also do their blood, but these we're scientists, we're in the lab, we don't have decades of exposure out in the field. And so actually getting fire personnel blood like yourself was it helped the test out. So the reason that we came to you and some others before the test was, one, we value your opinion, and two, we want what's in your blood.
Well, it's I think I've said it before, and if there's anything I can do, in terms of the scientific research, like I said, test my blood. And, it's, for me, it was difficult. Just a little history of going back, how I came, with you guys is, I retired in 2017 from the Air Force, and I really hadn't heard too much about the whole PFAS thing until about a year after I got out, as to, hey, this stuff can really, it's toxic. It can, it can really mess you up. Then I started hearing about these blood tests, and somebody had told me, they said, well, TRICARE, which is, most of, former military, their insurance. They said, well, TRICARE does this PFAS blood test. I said, okay, and I reached out to TRICARE, got the code. It took me a year to do it. I went over to my local doctor. He drew the blood, had to schedule, the appointment and everything. And we waited and waited. And it took about a month. And the results come back for PFOA. And of course it said non-detectable. And I'm like, wait a second, how can that be? I was slathered in this stuff for, over the 20 years, I was in the military. And, it sort of dropped from there. And then I started researching, Googling, and there's a company out in California. And then, they're expensive. And, I was like, well, okay, but I didn't really go for them. And then, you guys and I connected, and it's like, and I'll be honest, audience members, I was a little hesitant. I'm like, oh, okay, and I suspected I had some PFAS in my body. But, like I told my audience members in previous podcasts, when I got those results back, from you guys, and it listed numerous PFAS, high levels of PFOS, PFOS, PFHXS, and PFOA was in there. And I'm like, I was shocked. For one thing, I was like, 30 years after my first exposure, this stuff is still in my body. But then I looked at it and I'm like, see, that's what I'm talking about. TRICARE said there was none detectable, but you guys found detectable levels of PFOA. And again, it goes back, that's, whatever you guys have found or come up with to really get, I won't say it's a precise reading, but it's a damn close, precision on these, in my opinion, compared to other results that I've seen. I mean, you guys are really thorough in finding us. And again, that feedback, Taryn, that feedback that I'm getting from firefighters, they're like, yeah, I had my test done in the DOD, they come back non-detectable, but the civilian testing, independent lab found results in there, which makes one, question what's the difference? What's that egg that you guys cracked in order to get a more precise result?
We can talk about that, and in fact we will. But I do.
Okay.
We should note that it's when we hear, we are a civilian lab, we're a publicly traded company, we're not run by the government, but actually a lot of our work is outside of blood, is sanctioned by the DoD. We perform thousands of different DoD tests on solid samples, on aqueous samples, on water samples, and so we're held to the highest standards there are. And that was part of the things that we brought up with this test, was a lot of all the QA QC involved. And so with each set of samples, and we're talking up to 20 samples, not a huge amount, we have what we call a method blank. And that is a sample that follows your samples all around the lab. And that better not pick up any compounds, any PFAS compounds along the way. Otherwise, all those tests involved with that batch are invalid.
Yep.
And then we also have a positive control. We call it a laboratory control sample, or LCS. And this is a sample where we spike in all the compounds we're looking for. And that has to follow the samples all around the lab and come back within expected ranges. And so with each batch of samples, we have negative controls and positive controls that have to pass. And then really, you're talking about, your samples were non-detect by another method, but they're detected by ours. I'm sure I'm jumping the gun, Taryn, a little bit, but that's because we use a technique called isotope dilution, and it sounds kind of pretty highfalutin, and in a sense it is, because what we do is we buy stable isotopes of the PFAS that we're looking for. And we add those into your sample before we do anything to your sample. And what this does is these compounds are exactly the PFAS we're looking for, but we can differentiate them on our instrumentation. So our instrument can tell the isotope from the native compound, no problem. And what this does is it's twofold. One, we can use the area of that isotope to help quantitate the concentration of the compound we're looking for. And so that gives it that precise quantitation. And then also it helps against false positives and false negatives. If we see our peak that we added, but we don't see any peak for your blood sample, well, then that means our test worked because our peak is there, and you don't have that compound because that peak's not there. And so really it's the gold standard. People call isotope dilution the gold standard of analysis of quantitation, because it's more expensive to run, but the data that we're delivering you is top notch.
It is a lot more expensive to run. And so that is a consideration for laboratories about whether they employ those techniques or not because of the cost. It's also a much more sophisticated technique that you have to know how to run that kind of method. But it is what leads to that precision and the accuracy. So you can think of it like a tracer compound.
Yep.
For the kind of a layman's explanation. If the actual compound is red and the tracer compound is yellow, you see them light up on that instrument in sync at the same place at the same time, and we can identify it accurately that way.
Gotcha. So folks, when you see that $2.99 or $3.99, whatever the price is for this test, now you know what goes into that test. So it's well worth the money, folks. I'm telling you, this is why I brought these two on the podcast, so they can really give you the background of what goes into it. There's value in this test. So yeah, keep going, guys. I mean, this is awesome information.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know, where do we go next? What do you want to hear about?
Well, how about we talk about the data itself, the results.
There you go.
When you get a report. You had mentioned, Kevin, I think your experience with looking at some of the other reports that are available out there. And for us, that was a real area that we focused on, that we wanted the data to be, one, interpretable, that it would make sense at first glance, and then two, that you'd have some idea what to do with that information. So on the interpretable side, we tried to simplify the report as much as possible, make it very clean, easy to read. This is the compound, this is the concentration it was detected at. And then a really important piece that's unique to our report is because we're testing the sample as a whole blood as opposed to the serum, we created a column with serum equivalence. So this is really important because the most common thing to do with your results is compare to CDC NHANES. So NHANES is the study that the CDC conducts every 2 years. It's a biomonitoring effort to look at how the general population may be impacted by different chemical exposures. And so they publish this report, everybody can see it, and it's supposed to be representative representative of just the general population. So not particular populations that have known exposures, just generally speaking. And so you can see how you compare to those averages. And as you mentioned, for firefighters, oftentimes we see they are above those averages because you have an occupational exposure. But so in order to compare to the CDC results, you need that serum equivalent. And so we include that information on the report. But then beyond that, kind of the usability of the data, we provide something called a test guide. And it has information about where PFAS come from, the types of products and chemicals that they may be found in. So you can start to do an evaluation of where your exposure may be coming from and then try to eliminate those exposure sources. And then the other part of it is what's the impact on your health? And really, truly, this is the trickiest part because there isn't a diagnosis and treatment plan, clinically speaking, for PFAS exposure. So your first, go-to is going to be try to reduce your exposure. But if you've been exposed for long periods of time, someone like yourself, for decades, you had exposure, it's going to be more about a proactive health management plan with your primary care physician. So although they can't say, okay, well, I see you've got these levels of PFOA in your blood, that means that you're most likely going to end up with this health condition, and this is how we're going to treat it. It's not that black and white.
Right.
But they can say, let's say you're a young person that's been in the firefighting service for 5-6 years, and you have these elevated levels. Maybe you're in your 20s, and it would be unusual to do testicular cancer screening at that age. But if you have this exposure, maybe you talk to your doctor about doing some of those screenings at an earlier stage, proactively, and you start looking at different types of health effects and measuring and monitoring for those to make sure that these exposures weren't resulting in those kinds of negative effects.
Yeah, that's, I'll be honest, that's a challenge because getting your healthcare provider to, look at it like that. For me, I just, this past year, I've been up to the VA, started, because I was going to a civilian doctor for the longest time, and I said, okay, I'm rated 100%. I get free healthcare through the VA. Let me go up and start, working with them. And during our initial, consultation, he's like, what do you do? I said, well, I was a firefighter for 20 years in the military. I said, I'm still a volunteer firefighter. He goes, oh, and as we got to talking, he's like, yeah, he goes, you're normal risk for cancer. I'm like, wait a second. I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm a firefighter. We're exposed to who knows what out there. Plus, I've been exposed to PFAS. I said, I think if anything, I'm, a higher risk of developing cancer. And, so I got to double check, make sure that he actually put that in my medical records, because I got a feeling he didn't. But you're absolutely right. And I've seen some younger military and DoD civilian firefighters out there with elevated levels. In whether it's the DoD test or it's your guys' test, and I've always said, we as a patient, we almost have to steer our medical. We have to push our doctors. Don't just go in and I've had doctors in the past be like, hey, how do you feel today? I'm like, well, I feel okay. Boom, check the box and that's it. I'm like, don't leave that doctor's office until things are recorded, especially with a PFAS test, and you guys discuss it, because you're right. And I've told, a lot of firefighters, I'm like, I may have been slathered with it, have elevated levels, and I never get sick. But that individual that has, just below, what could be considered an average may end up developing something. That's just the nature of the beast with the human body. Our bodies react
That's right.
differently. So yeah, we're not there yet. You're absolutely right. I wish we were, but
I know.
to be able to.
On a positive note, I will add, though, that there are federal funded efforts underway to help bring your average primary care physician up to speed on these data and what to do with them. So there are funded efforts right now to develop, I think it's through National Academy of Sciences. It's either
Okay.
National Academy of Sciences or the NIH is working to develop guidance for primary care physicians on when to order these tests, what to do with the results, how to talk to their patients about them. So that'll be coming out, in the next year or so. And so there is an understanding that there's a need for it, and
Mhm.
they are working on tools to bring folks up to speed on it.
Great. And just, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that this really does fall under the knowledge is power type of thing. Like
Mhm.
it's empowering to know, and there's no way to know if you have elevated levels or not. And in fact, we've seen people almost have, very similar upbringings, but for some reason, some people do accumulate more PFAS than other people. And so,
Yeah.
it's not just because you're in an impacted area or you have occupational exposure. We're still learning. The science community is still learning about PFAS. And so it's one of those, where do I fit in? It's a given that 95% of us probably have some level, but that knowledge is power of am I elevated? Am I not? It's one of those things where it's one less thing to worry about at night. You get some closure
Yeah.
on if I am elevated, where around me do I look? Where
Yeah.
in my environment? Is it from where I grew up? Is it from where I am now? What are my family members? Are they elevated? So it's really,
And vice versa. I
yeah.
mean, we've seen fire personnel with low levels of PFAS. So just assuming that you have that exposure and you're suffering from, harmful effects of these toxic chemicals, you may be able to sigh, that relief to know
Mhm.
that it didn't have that impact on you.
Yeah. And I just had that exact scenario the other day. I had a firefighter, send me their results. It was, through the DoD testing, and they were below, the CDC's geometric mean. And I said, hey, here's where you stand. Here's where you're at compared to the CDC and all the other firefighters. And he's like, you could, the chat, you could almost sense there was that sigh of relief. It's like, yeah, I'm not super exposed. I don't know if he or she was taking, preventative measures to go ahead and, reduce that unnecessary exposure. Cause that's the big thing we're really foot stomping now, especially in the fire services. We know it's in firefighting foam. We know it's been found in turnout gear. A couple things, we can't get away from. But those other products that it may be in, we've said if you don't have to put turnout gear on, don't put it on. Start implementing those practices so you're not unnecessarily exposed. And but before we go on, one thing I want to ask. Hopefully, you can shed some light on this. It's a question that's been coming up a lot lately. The half-life of PFAS. I think like PFAS, it's like 2.5 years or 2.7. It depends on which site you go to. Can you explain, and hopefully how I explained it was right? Can you explain how the half-life of, say, we'll use PFOS, works? From the half-life, and then from that half-life, that point on. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'm sure Taryn can chime in where she wants. So if we just kind of take a step back and not specifically talk about half-life, but if we're talking about the half-life of any compound in your body, an easy way to think about it is, if exposure were to stop today, what is the amount of time that half of the concentration of that compound were to either be metabolized or to degrade or to just be less measurable in your body by a factor of 2 or 1/2. And so from that initial what is the time length of that half-life? And then if we go to PFAS, there is a correlation between how long of a chain, we're talking about the actual compound chain length, the number of carbons, the longer the chain in general, the longer the half-life. And so, some of the replacement chemistries in AFFF have focused on shorter chain length.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to mitigate some of that exposure where, actually PFHXS is a pretty long one. That's something like 20 to 30 years, I think.
Wow.
4 to 35 years.
4 to 35.
So a half-life will depend on the individual. Gender plays a role, age plays a role, the form of the chemical. That individual chemical comes in different forms, that plays a role. So they're pretty wide ranges, but needless to say, it's not short. I mean, 4 to 35 years, that's a long time. And as Andrew mentioned, that half-life is measuring if you were to stop being exposed to it today. But as we know with PFAS, it's just generally a continual replenishment into your body, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's, you could say, okay, that's a measure of years, 4 to 35 years. You get down into a 4-carbon backbone, something like PFBA or PFBS, and that's a matter of days. That's something like 48 to 72 hours is the half-life for those compounds, which really goes back to the fact that, one of the applications we envisioned with this test was for fire research. Because this is remotely deployed, because we don't need a blood draw, you guys could go out, have on an incident, and if somebody was doing a study, you could say, okay, here are my baseline levels before, on Friday, and then we had incidents all weekend, and then here are my levels 4 hours after an exposure, 6 hours, 12 hours, and so you could map out what shows up in your blood, and then perhaps what's declining in your blood, which was really never able to be done before. And in fact, we're doing some similar studies like that right now with some universities. It's really cool. Yeah.
Nice.
And then, half-life is just one piece of the puzzle. So toxicity is the other piece. As Andrew mentioned, we refer to them as legacy PFAS. So the ones that were mass produced for decades that most people are familiar with, like PFOA and PFOS, those being the legacy, those were long chain chemicals. And then the replacement chemicals that were made were targeted at being short chain. C6 was kind of that tipping point. C6 or shorter was considered a short chain. And so you'll even see that on AFFF product flyers, that they'll say C6 inside or I am C6, promoting that as a benefit to this transition to the shorter chain. So shorter chain is one element that may cause your body to eliminate it faster, but then toxicity is the other element. So there's recent toxicity data on some of the shorter chain that eliminate quite rapidly, like a matter of hours, days. But the toxicity is so high that even that shorter duration is leading to similar health effects as something that stays in your body much longer. So it's really complex and it's compound specific. That just adds enormous layers of complexity to unraveling all of this, because we can't just say PFAS as a class. It's each individual PFAS that we have to look at. Does it have health effects? What kind of toxicity does it have? And that's part of the reason why with our tests, we expanded it to look for more compounds than anybody else has. So the CDC and Haines study, they look for 12 individual compounds. It ends up getting reported as 16 because of the separation of branched and linear isomers. But so if you look at those 16, we expanded our test to look for 46. So that 46 includes more of those replacement chemicals, the next generation of PFAS chemicals that were made that nobody's really been looking at to see what our exposure levels look like for those.
Yeah. So, one thing, we always talk about in the fire service, it's we go out on a hazardous materials incident, probably about 99% of the time, we know the substance we're dealing with, whether it be, via placards, safety data sheets, some sort of information has been provided to the responders. It says, hey, this is what you guys are dealing with, or this is what you were exposed to. When it comes to PFAS, I'll just, let's look at the foam, for example. A lot of times those containers don't list, or we're unaware of what's, the ingredient list of these products. So how does one sort of, prepare or deal with that? If they don't know what they've been exposed to.
Yeah. So, what regulates the listing of chemicals on those SDS sheets is um, the hazardous substance designation. So, the federal government makes that designation. And if chemicals are hazardous substances, they are required to be disclosed on those SDSs. That has not been the case for PFAS. So, at best, you might see something that says fluorosurfactant,
Mm-hmm.
Proprietary fluorosurfactant, something like that. That's basically telling you it's PFAS.
Okay.
But this may be addressed relatively soon. So the current administration has committed to designating at least PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances, which would trigger that designation on the SDSs. And
Gotcha.
that initiative is underway, and hopefully we may even see that occur by this year. But
Okay.
it just addresses those two legacy PFAS. It wouldn't necessarily require the next generation of replacement PFAS to be disclosed.
So how do we get PFHXS on that list? Because like I said
Yeah.
earlier, about 96%, of those that provided their test results, to my survey are showing that particular PFAS substance, in their blood. And, it's, that's, I'm glad you broke it down as to how these things are, they're either defined or not defined as hazardous substance, because a lot of folks, myself included, for a long time, are like, why don't they just publish an ingredient list? So folks, now if it's not a designated hazardous substance, likely it's not going to be on there, because even looking at some of the SDSs, the safety data sheets, there's some that I've seen, especially for high expansion foam. As you go down through the document, it'll have on there like X number of percent unknown toxic chemicals or unknown substances, and I'm like, what are these? What are these things that they're toxic, but what are they? And at what point should we be concerned? The dosage amount.
And
That's a
And looking at those things, Kevin, that's actually a whole area of interest within the PFAS community. We
Mhm.
have people that fingerprint, for quote unquote fingerprint, all the hundreds or thousands of PFAS found within different sort of solutions. And so there are people that want to get their hands on expired foam, that want to get there to study them, because and that's no easy feat. The instrumentation required to look at all the compounds within an AFFF is even more sophisticated than we do our test on. We
Yeah.
have some of them, to actually look at all the compounds, sort of all the stars in the sky when it comes to PFAS is very complex. So the simple answer is none of us, somebody maybe knows, but none of us know,
Yeah.
because of copyright reasons and because of the complexity.
Well, I'll
Yeah.
tell you one thing though, too, even prior to those hazardous substances designations going into effect, there's a lot of attention being paid to waste disposal right now.
Mhm.
So anything that has AFFF impacted waste that needs to be disposed of, those waste disposal companies are requiring information about it, what's contained in those AFFF impacted waste. So they're either asking the manufacturers to certify that their product does not have PFAS in it, or simply provide them with a test with the data to show that it doesn't. So this is becoming a more common practice of kind of putting it back on the manufacturers to provide information about. It doesn't have to be a formulation. It's still can be covered under that confidential business information, but just really more about the presence of PFAS in general and at about what concentrations.
Okay. So before we get into the actual test itself, is there anything either of you two want to cover that we haven't covered that you want to get out there and let audience members know?
I think we're good. No, I guess one thing, if we're talking about tools kind of at everyone's disposal, if people are looking at the NHANES data, the data from the CDC, a normal, we'll call it a normal background for PFAS would have a descending order of concentration. So for the general public, more people, the most people have PFOS as the highest concentration, followed by PFOA, followed by PFHXS. And so those three go in that order. And while it's not, it's not a set in stone thing for everybody, because people's metabolism is different and everybody handled PFAS a little bit differently. If you say you have PFHXS 10 times higher than one of those other compounds, or if that order is really skewed somewhere, that tells you, okay, I haven't had normal background exposure like your average American. Something different. Is it something different in the past? Is it something different now? So, sometimes it's not all about the absolute concentration. Oh, I had 10 or 5 or something like that. It could just be, what's the ratio? What's the relationship of these PFAS to each other, to maybe make a person investigate a little bit further.
Right. Those could indicate a certain type of occupational exposure, or maybe your drinking water has been contaminated by specific operations, in your area. So yeah, this can be a good indicator of kind of where to look.
Okay. So one quick question. So for me, they found, or you guys found PFOS, PFOA, PFHXS, and I think there was a few other ones in there. So what risks should I be concerned with? Because obviously that it's like a cocktail moving through my blood right now. So when those substances combined, does that create a new PFAS, or is it just they're along for the ride and they group together and say, "Hey, we're gonna do this to you"?
Yeah, no combining into any kind of conglomerate PFAS. They're
Okay.
just still remain the individuals. Now, whether there's different health effects from that combination of PFAS, I am not aware of that being studied yet. We're still, I think, at the stage of the health effect data being specific to individual compounds.
We're in the
Okay.
dark ages of PFAS right now.
Yeah.
But we're doing our best to try to catch up with it. But it's one of these, 50, like you mentioned at the beginning of the program, 50 years from now, we'll look back and, say, what were these people doing, foam angels in the foam. And,
Yeah.
I've heard of jokes of, people putting a little bit of AFFF in someone's shampoo
Mm-hmm.
at the Coast Guard and stuff. And so, you look back on some of those old timey advertisements where there was, like arsenic in somebody's makeup powder or something like that. We're going to look back on this with a lot more vision than we went going into it.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing it now. I mean, I started my career in '91, and we were told, AFFF, the firefighting foam was just soap and water. And, we washed our uniforms with it. We washed the trucks. We washed the stalls. We sprayed kids down during, fire prevention visits because, hey, look, it's snowing. It's, go play in the snow. And guys going away, every time they would, get reassigned. That was sort of an initiation. Hey, let's dump them, let's dump a bucket of foam on them and, spray them down and it all suds up. And it's like, I look at it now, I'm like, what
my
were
God.
we
Yeah.
thinking? It's like, good gosh. And that's not even mentioning the groundwater and drinking water contamination that resulted from, daily release of AFFF, during operational checks. And,
Yep. And that's why we one of the areas we always go to when we're at sites, or that our consultants go to, are FTAs, fire training areas. We know
Mhm.
those are going to be hot spots ahead of time. I mean,
Yep.
doesn't take a rocket scientist or a PFAS scientist to figure out like where's the PFAS going to be coming from in the ground, the fire training area.
Yep. Yep. Well, the other area too was along the flight line. We would take our crash
yeah.
trucks out and for driver's training or flight line familiarization, and we would stop at various points along the flight line, spray it into the ground. Don't put it on the taxiway because the pilots would get upset, but we'd spray it just off the side, off the hard top, and that stuff seeped into the ground and created a plume or merged with an existing plume. And because a lot of the fire training pits, they're lined, they have liners in them now. Decades ago, that wasn't the case. It was just a dirt area, and they sprayed foam and it seeped into the ground, and who knows where it ended up at. But so
In the
let's get
groundwater.
into yeah,
Definitely,
exactly.
it's in the groundwater.
And then
Exactly.
most bases have their own wells, right? Because you
Yep.
want to be self-sufficient. So something's going down and something's coming up, and it's not what you
Yep.
think it is.
Exactly. So let's talk about this fancy little test that you guys developed. What can audience members expect when they receive this kit?
Taryn's reaching for one. Her hand is
Okay.
disappearing, but he's reaching for one.
Yeah, should have thought to had it at my desk. So I've got a kit here. I can show you.
Okay.
There's the box that it comes in, and I think a lot of folks will be, sadly, probably very familiar with at-home test kits nowadays because of
Yeah.
COVID testing, right? So it comes with a lot of the same components that people have gotten more familiar with. So you've got a QR code, and
It's actually disappearing with your background.
In the background.
if I held
There
by
you
my
go.
face.
Yeah. Yep.
So QR code, you just got to scan it and activate the kit, right? Everybody knows that practice. And then you've got nice handy set of very thorough instructions on how to collect the sample and make sure that you're not compromising the sample in any way, right? We want that data to be accurate. So follow those instructions. And we've got all these different options for Lancets, and they're age specific. So you can do this test on your children if you feel a need to, or teenagers or adults. So there's the Lancets, and that's just as simple as pricking your finger, and then you kind of massage the finger to get the blood flowing. And then
I should point out that we did not skimp on the Lancets. After having done this
I know.
a ton of times myself, there are low quality ones which kind of sound like an old Chevy going into gear and slam your finger. And then there are these ones which are the top of the line ones, which are much more pleasant.
Yeah. Yep.
And this is the sampling device itself, and they look like little Q-tips. They have little adsorptive tips. And so once you prick your finger, you hold the tip to the blood spot and you just let it'll pull up the blood from your finger, and you fill all 4 of these. And it's most critical they are filled. So double check them, make sure you don't see any white left on the tips, that it's totally saturated, or it will affect the accuracy of the test. So that's the really key thing with this. After that, you close it back up, put it back in the mailer. It's got a shipping label already on it. Just drop it off at a FedEx or UPS store or whatever, and it gets back to the lab. And then you'll get an email notification that your results are ready about 2 weeks later. And you can go on the app on your phone or on the website on your computer, and there's a secure link to access your results. And then, another nice thing that we didn't mention before is that these results are private. This isn't between you and your insurance company and your medical record if you don't want it to be. These are just your own results for you to do with what you choose.
Nice. Now, Andrew, you talked about earlier with blood serum. Put it in a container. You got dry ice and everything like that. Your guys, this test kit doesn't need anything special, right?
No, and that's this does go back. Some of the ingenuity does go back to that device. We're using it's by a company down in Southern California called Neoterix. The device is called the Mitra. So the Neoterix Mitra device. Trust me when I say we tried 4 or 5 different devices to bring this up on, the test up on, but this device, one, doesn't have any PFAS background, meaning there are a lot of plastics that have PFAS, but this isn't one of them. So that's something that you need to be able to study PFAS. Yeah. And then 2, it's volumetric, so it's a precise draw of that whole blood, and that is important because that's how we quantitate. That's how we give you the numbers that we need to give you. And then third, it actually in that bag that you ship it back in, there's a desiccant. There's a little desiccant card. And so the blood droplets are actually dried in transportation, and we want them to dry. And the media, the blood itself, holds onto those PFAS. I mean, we are talking forever chemicals here. And so we also opted for overnight shipping. And so this, between all these factors, we get some really, really good results from this device without any sort of preservation. And the fact also that it's a dried blood spot, there's actually a term, a DBS. DBS don't need any sort of hazardous designation because it's not a liquid blood sample. So really, for us, it became a no-brainer. Like, it doesn't need refrigeration, it doesn't need hazardous designation. It's a lot safer for everyone involved. And you can do the test yourself, which overcame a lot of, like we talked about earlier, some legal challenges and also just access challenges. So it's turned out pretty sweet, I think.
Oh, I concur. Like I said, it's I've seen the other tests. This thing just, I mean, from the moment I got it, the concept when it was conveyed to me, and I was trying to picture it in my mind. I'm like, okay, how does this thing work? And then when I get it, like I said, I mean, just the instructions, the kit itself, how you apply the blood, how you package it back up. Like I said, I mean, I had everything done in about 5 minutes. Yeah. My son was there with me. He was curious, and and he got a test done as well, which his results, he said I could say it. His results come back. He's got PFAS and PFH excess, in his system as well, and it makes sense because military dependent, traveling around. He was probably cross exposed to it at some point. His levels aren't as high as mine are, fortunately, but it's still there. But yeah, this
testing PFAS in blood for about 15 years now, and I still am waiting on my first non-detect. Wow. So it's one of those. I've seen some folks that were pretty low, unusually low, but I'm still waiting on something where we don't see any PFAS. So.
Yeah,
I'm not too surprised. How old is your son, sir?
He is 23.
23, okay.
23, yep. So I mean, he's been to Arizona, Virginia, Germany, here in Pennsylvania. So it's there. It's very likely. The all the products that are out there that contain PFAS. The fact that he. Was in the military with me, military exposure, firefighter exposure. So, we don't second guess. Yeah, there's probably that cross contamination exposure. But fortunately, we're glad to see his levels aren't as high as mine. But yeah, that's like you said, that's our goal, is to not not to put anybody out of business, but the end goal is to have zero PFAS in our bodies. But we can't, I think like we said before, we can't know what's in our bodies unless we're testing. And you guys have developed, I'll just say it, a kick-ass test. I mean, this thing is awesome. It's what's that acronym? KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Well,
This is
I'm glad it appears simple on the outside, because what drives it in the guts
Didn't feel so simple.
Doesn't feel so simple. It's incredibly complex, and when one of the asks that we to be able to perform this, because we almost created a lab within a lab to be able to pull this blood test off for what we need to do. And so we realized pretty early on, we said, okay, well, we need about 1.4 million dollars in instruments to be able to do this the right way. And so, luckily we at Eurofins, people recognize that this is a big deal. This is going to be a big thing. And so, yeah, we got that funding, we got that support. And so it's really a marriage of pretty amazing sampling technology, some pretty amazing PFAS scientists, PFAS chemists that do thousands of these samples, and then the next generation of instrumentation to be able to deliver these results, and the IT and outwardly facing presence of EmpowerDX. So it's really cool, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of firefighters around the world, because you guys are global. To have to know what went into this test, to be able to talk to individuals involved in this, the brains behind all this. I appreciate everything that Eurofins and EmpowerDX has done to get this thing from cradle to where we are now. I just can't imagine the hours that have gone into this, the brain cells that went into taking something from a post-it note to something that's out on the market right now. It's sweet, it's cool, it's awesome. Again, I could be all day long as my earpiece falls out here.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
And you know what? We also it's not going to just stop there. I mean, we are constantly working on evolving, developing what's next, what's important to focus on. So for your listeners, if you do take this test, if you have feedback for us, if anything's missing the mark, if you become aware of maybe there's certain compounds we're not capturing that you think are relevant to you, anything, just if you've got feedback for us, please share it with us, because the wheels are always churning on what to do next or do better.
We should give one away. Do we have one to give away?
Yeah, let's do that. Can we do that, Kevin?
Absolutely. Hey, it's your product. we can do that. We can do that. So
Yeah.
how do you?
I don't know. I guess we haven't done this before, but we could come up with a code, much like the code that we supplied to yourself. But
okay,
decide on a listener or have a contest, and just let us know, and then we'll make it happen.
Yeah,
okay.
People can, I don't know, comment, send you a note, something, and we'll pick a random name out of the group and send them a kit.
Maybe not a competition for the highest levels. Let's not do that.
No, let's not do that. So, yeah, I mean, we can either pick a listener, we can do a question and the first right answer in the comment is the winner.
It's up to you.
Oh gosh, it's up to me. Yeah, we'll do a drawing.
There you go.
We'll do a drawing of listeners. So that means, audience members, you're going to have to subscribe, like, give us a thumbs up or whatever to be eligible for this. So
there's no quiz. There won't be a quiz.
No quiz. No quiz. So yeah, folks, you heard it. They are going to grant a free test kit, but in order to qualify, in order to be eligible, you have to be a subscriber to our YouTube channel or to one of our podcast pages. So yeah, give us a like, a thumbs up, subscribe, and we will randomly select somebody and get that information, that kit out to you ASAP. Awesome. You guys are the best.
Thank you.
So before we end the podcast here, last go around, anything you want to talk about, you want to highlight?
No, I'll just close with that. One of the inspirations for me to come up with this test was a retired firefighter from the California Bay Area. And so it's made me happy to see this in the service of folks who could use the information. So from really, I mean, I do mean it. It's really amazing to work for Eurofins, whose motto is testing for life, and they put their money where their mouth is. This is a test designed to test for life, designed to help people. So it makes me very happy.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it. Taryn, anything?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew, and this data, generating this data and this pool of data, not just for individuals, but for the community of firefighters, I think is only going to help, improve the situation for everyone moving forward. With more data, there can be more advocacy, to do something about it, for folks to change the current status. So I encourage you to, try and contribute to that effort.
Cool. And I just wanted to mention, we talk about firefighters, here on the podcast, but really this test it's perfect for anybody that suspects they've been exposed to PFAS. So we're looking at firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, anybody out there. This thing is commercially available. I think the current price right now is $299. That is, I'll just say that's a steal in comparison to your competitors. But the thoroughness that comes out of this test far exceeds anything that I've seen out there. So again, I could sit here and just promote you guys all day long. That's how much I think about this product. So
thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for this episode of the Weekend Wrap-Up here at episode 21. We've had some amazing guests today. We've had Andrew Patterson and Taryn McKnight from Eurofins and EmpowerDX. Hopefully they answered some of those questions that you've been sending in about this new PFAS blood testing. If you still have questions, comments, go ahead and throw them down below in the YouTube channel or on our podcast channels, or even on social media, Facebook, Twitter. We're out there as well. So that's going to do it for this episode. So as always, stay safe, keep supporting your local fire emergency services, and until next time, we are out of here.